Welcome to Brothers in Media with the bros who know, Scott and Craig Colby. The CBC, oh, how people have opinions about the CBC with these strongly held beliefs that fact we're going to find out today. I am joined, as always, by Scott Colby, a journalist with 36 years of experience as a reporter, columnist, editor, photographer, designer, as well as a national best-selling author and the creator of the Coach Colby Writing Academy. Visit his website, coachcolby.me, for a free insider's cheat sheet on how to write effective op-eds. He has never worked at the CBC.
And he's Craig Colby. I never know which way he's going to end up, so I'm going to hedge my bets. Craig Colby has spent 37 years in broadcasting. He's an award-winning executive producer and author and owner of Colby Vision, a video production and consulting company. Craig has never worked at the CBC, but Simon Dingley has, and he's joining us today. He's also worked at CTV and Global News, delivering the news to the good people of Canada. He is here today to help set the record straight. Welcome, Simon.
Thanks for having me on your podcast, guys.
All right, Simon, I'm going to get right into the deep stuff. One of the reasons I wanted to do this particular show is a Facebook post. Somebody I know from my hometown. This is an intelligent person who has retired. He's a grandpa and everything. He once posted that the Prime Minister's office tells the CBC what to have on the news. And I said, where did you get that opinion from? He said, it's not an opinion. I know it. And then I disagreed with him and he never came back to me. So here's my question. And I know the answer, but I have to ask it anyway. Does the Prime Minister's office tell the CBC what to put on the news?
Craig, there's a myth that CBC is in the Liberal government's pocket. I've seen this all over social media, usually from people who've never actually worked for the CBC or the Prime Minister's office. In the 30 years I worked for the CBC as a news reporter and producer, not once did anyone at CBC say, go soft on the Prime Minister or any of his cabinet ministers.
All right, so that's what I thought. How does you worked in the CBC, you also worked at Global and CTV. Let's start with CBC stuff. How does the CBC newsroom work?
This is a very good question. A lot of people don't know how a story goes to air. What happens is CBC and CTV and Global all have senior producers. They monitor the news, not only in Canada, but around the world. And they look for stories that could be of interest to their viewers. And when they find one, the senior producers will talk about it. And then if they think there's merit to this story, they'll tell an assignment editor, they'll tell an assignment editor, okay, let's get a reporter on this story. And quite possibly they will also assign a producer to look into the story to see that it's a real news story. The reporter and producer start working away on it, and they say, yes, there is a story. And usually by 10 a.m. in the morning, this happens. The reporter will say, okay, let's go and get this. And they go out and chase the story. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the reporters and producers are required to call into the assignment desk and the senior producer's desk and tell them exactly what they have found out so far and what elements they have for the story. And if the senior producers say, yes, we still think we've got a story, they keep at it. At 4 o'clock or at 5 o'clock at the latest, usually the reporter or producer has to call in again and say, here's what we have. We think we have enough for a story, or no, there's not enough for a story. The story is then edited if the producers approve it. But at any time, if the senior producers think this is not strong enough or it's not a legitimate story, they can kill the story. And it's happened to me. I've worked right up till 9 o'clock one night when the National was going to air, the early edition of the National. And at 8:55, I got a call from a producer many years ago, and she said, your story's dead. So that's basically the process. It works the same at Global and CTV. I work for them as well. And the same situation, senior producers hand out the stories, and the reporters are allowed to say, no, this is not a story. So if they don't think it is.
Is there a difference between CBC, CTV, and Global, and how that process works? Do you have more resources, or does one more aggressive, or does one have a different angle or a different focus?
They could all have various angles on a story. It's basically the same process. CBC, because it has more people will discuss the story and bring out certain questions. Often the reporter may have to defend the story. Like the producers will say to him, "What did you find about this?" And if he says, "Well, we find there's nothing to the story," then a producer might say, "Well, did you check this angle? Did you check that angle?" Basically, because CBC is public and it gets taxpayers' dollars, it has more people, and more people look over your story, and any one of them can say, "We don't think you've got enough for a story here." Global, and I was a local reporter for Global. I think it's pretty much the same, although they don't have the same amount of resources. And I worked for CTV local in Montreal. They didn't have the same amount of resources as CBC National does.
So I have only worked in one newsroom. I worked in the TSN newsroom. I worked in Discovery Channel Science newsroom. I've been a senior editor. I've been a Simon editor. I've been a producer at one point, a cruise reporter. This sounds like every newsroom I've ever been in, maybe with more check-in points. How about you, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in print, but yeah, same thing, same sort of process. Not as tied to these deadlines, throughout the day. But yeah, it sounds like the same process. A give and take, reporter, editor, coming up with ideas. Do we have the story? Don't we have the story? Where are we at? Do we hold it? Do we kill it? I guess one question I want to get to is working in public. Okay, so the Prime Minister isn't in your ear right now, but in the private sector, did you have pressure from ownership, whoever owned CTV or Global, to interfere with?
Nope, never. And I've got to say, there are good people both at Global and CTV. I never had anyone say, take the government's line on this story, or to throw a softball question at either of those networks either.
But I mean, like the owners, did the owners say, "Hey, I'm buddies with so-and-so, you cannot critique this company or this or whatever," anything like that?
I never experienced anything like that. For the most part, all of them are hardworking media types or journalists. I never saw anything like that where an owner might say, "Hey, get this story off the air." I didn't see that.
Yeah, I can tell you, I saw it once at TSN, and it had something to do with criticizing. There was a story that was killed because it was critical of the NHL, and TSN is a rights holder. And far more than Sports Desk, they show games. So that's the only time I've ever seen it in my career. So the idea that corporate overlords or the government are in there with their fingers in the pie of a newscast every day is, none of us have seen it, but also it's impractical just by the speed at which you're going and the number of oversights you need to even get it to air or into print.
You just jogged my memory on something, Craig. When I was a reporter for Global News, one day I was at my desk working on my story. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon, and the assignment editor came up to me and said, "You know what? We don't need your story tonight. We're good." And that was very rare because Global was very lean and mean on the ground. They don't waste resources. And then I saw the assignment editor approach two other reporters and say, "You know what? We don't need your story tonight." So I watched with interest to find out why my story had been dropped. And in the middle of Global's newscast, they brought on McPizza from McDonald's. And it was a bit of a shock to see basically an infomercial during the middle of news for McPizza. And a few of the reporters, we all looked at each other like, but it's private television and they have their constraints too, and their financial resources. So I wasn't totally surprised. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I understood why they did it.
But that wasn't suppressing the news per se.
No.
That was just clearing the decks to make a way for basically an ad.
No, never did I have anything like that happen at CTV or Global. No.
Yeah. So for all the people listening or watching, this is like 100 years of broadcast and print news experience saying we have never seen it. We have never really seen. There's two examples. They're a little dicey. So this idea that the corporate overlords have their fingers in the news pie, that just hasn't been the experience of the people working on this. And I haven't heard stories really about it either. Quick question. Like we started with this misnomer of the CBC. What do people get wrong about the CBC from your opinion, Simon?
I think it's just the misconception that CBC is far left wing and supports that policy. Here's something a lot of people may not know, Craig. I remember the first year I moved to CBC from Global, and it was during an election campaign, and I wasn't involved in the election campaign. I was far too junior at the time. And I watched the producers round the national assignment desk, and they had stopwatches. And what they were doing was they were timing the amount of seconds the Liberal leader was on screen, the amount of time the Conservative leader was on screen, and the NDP leader. And if, say, the Liberal leader was getting 25 seconds of screen time in a story, and the other two, the opponents, weren't, they would tell the reporter, okay, look, we're not giving enough screen time to the others. You've got to make this equal. It's one of the things that CBC, that I was pleasantly surprised by.
Just one more follow-up question with the CBC. When we did the pre-interview, you had a great story about what was different for you when you went to the CBC from Global or CTV. What was the biggest difference that you noticed right away?
You know, I had this stereotype misconception that CBC was filled with fat cats and lazy, and there were dozens of people helping you. When I got to CBC, I never worked harder in my life, because suddenly, instead of filing just for the 6 o'clock news at Global, which I did, I was filing as early as noon for CBC Midday, and then recutting my story for News World throughout the afternoon, and then filing a piece to the local news for 6 o'clock. And then if the national wanted it, you'd be still recutting it then, and you'd recut it each time to make it better. It was something I'd never experienced. And it's even tougher right now for the reporters and producers who are there, because they're often not only filing their TV pieces, but they're also doing radio pieces. You probably heard them on CBC Radio. It's the same reporters. And in some cases, they're writing blogs. They're writing pieces for cbcnews.ca. They're working way harder now than I did when I was there.
Well, you also said something about recognition.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. When I used to cover Queen's Park, and I'd be just one of the many faceless hordes of reporters there. And then a week after I got to CBC, Bob Rae was the Premier of Ontario at the time. Bob Rae recognized me and used my name for the first time ever. So I realized quickly, okay, he must watch CBC. But he'd never used my name before when I was at Global.
Does that make it more fun to be in an environment like that, or is it just too hectic? Would you rather be at the CBC, or would you rather be at someplace like Global or CTV?
I'll tell you what, Craig. Sorry, Scott. I left Global for CBC, and I took a $6,000 pay cut to do it in 1994 because I wanted the experience that CBC offers. I could have stayed at Global and probably coasted. But I didn't want that. I wanted to do more. I wanted to learn more. And I grew up watching CBC all my life. It was invigorating to suddenly see the opportunities at CBC that I wouldn't have got at Global, because there were far more experienced people at Global who deserved those opportunities. Suddenly at CBC, I was allowed to anchor the news on News World, the local news as well. I would never have had that opportunity at Global. I worked for Hockey Night in Canada. I've done documentaries and all that. All I'm saying is by going to CBC, I got opportunities I wouldn't have got elsewhere. So I have no regrets.
Nice. I'm glad you had that opportunity.
Me too. Me too. I've told one young person who was really nervous when they got there. I said, "You're going to get opportunities here. Just keep your nose clean, and if you work hard, the opportunities will pop up. You'll be amazed." I've been to the Olympics. I never thought I'd be doing that. Going to the Olympics, which was one of the highlights of my career. So
here's a big question: do you think the CBC should be competing with private enterprises? And I say this also because I've worked in print. When I started out in the 80s, early 90s, we didn't compete directly with the CBC, right? At all. Now with websites, we compete directly. All news organizations compete directly with one another on the web. So how do you feel about that?
I'm conflicted about it. I certainly respect your point of view and others who say CBC shouldn't be competing against the other privates because we get government funding. And the thing I'd say is if the government funding was stripped or were defunded, a lot of CBC would disappear. And my concern is that Canadians would be flooded with American news. But I certainly understand why other broadcasters and print journalists would be upset about the lack of funding, whereas the CBC gets $1.4 billion a year, and Radio-Canada it's split.
Right.
Hey, listen, I said this before. I think of the CBC as the Obi-Wan Kenobi. They're kind of our last hope now. and not just from the news, but in programming. There's just so
Mm.
little commissioning for Canadian programming in Canada, and most of it comes from the CBC. They're the last place that I see that will take chances and do something original and not just try to follow a trend, Top Chef Canada or whatever. So I've never worked at the CBC. I've always competed with the CBC, but I've never been more grateful to have that around. So just leading into that, what can the CBC do now that private industry can't?
I think CBC should be doing things like taking chances, just like you recommended earlier. I was never so proud as the night I watched the Tragically Hip special that was on CBC a few years ago, their final concert, and CBC showed it commercial free. And I thought, this is what we need to do. Now, the other side of the spectrum is, of course, TV is very expensive to do. It's unbelievable how much it costs. And I don't know if what I'm saying is realistic, but of course, I'd love to see it go commercial free. I just don't know if it could happen. But I think we should do more things like that. Cover the things that cover the stories that maybe other networks and media outlets can't cover. That's what I think we should be doing, and sometimes they get it right.
Yeah, what do you think about? Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to share a story. There's a criticism of the CBC, and there's something that happened in December 2019. Justin Trudeau was at Buckingham Palace, and he was caught trash talking Donald Trump. You may remember the story. Yep. It made international headlines. And a friend of mine who openly takes shots at the CBC messaged me, and he chortled and he said, I guess the CBC won't be reporting on this story. Well, in fact, CBC had broken the story. CBC producer had listened to all the audio tapes and heard Justin Trudeau making the comments about Trump, and it turned into a huge international story. And when I pointed this out to my friend, he said, whatever.
Yeah.
You can't win.
Can't win.
No.
Craig and I have talked about that in previous our podcasts about, public perceptions, how hard it is to change them. People have their point of view. I'm a huge fan of CBC, particularly CBC Radio. Right. When I came to Toronto in the late 90s, I was surprised that CTV had such larger numbers on the news. I didn't realize how profoundly different it was. And I often wondered whether CBC should be competing in television news in a big market like Toronto, right? Whereas I've worked in Thunder Bay, I've worked in Kingston, I've worked in Ottawa, I've worked in Hamilton, in London, Ontario as well. And I can see the value of having, a broadcaster like CBC there, especially the radio, especially in Thunder Bay. Now there'd be almost no news in Thunder Bay if I worked for CBC Radio. And I've benefited from it. I've been on their morning show promoting books and things like that. But how do you feel about? I mean, I would like to see definitely the radio aspect of it expanded. Yeah.
Radio is very popular. I freely admit it's more popular than TV news. I primarily worked for TV. The odd time I'd fill in hosting on the radio, or my reports would sometimes run on the radio. Funny anecdote, if I can. One day, CBC Radio lifted my audio track from my TV story and ran it on the local CBC Radio News. And I got a call from my mother, and she was very excited. And she said, "Are you working for CBC Radio now?" And I said, "No." I said, "No, I'm still working for TV. They just took my audio." And she went, "Oh."
There you go.
Well, your mom's proud of you. That's
only if I'm on radio. Yeah.
There's nothing better than that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, when my book came out, my wife was never more excited than when it got into the library.
Oh.
Suddenly that was legitimate.
Yes, it legitimized it. Yes, of course. CBC Radio is, no one can deny, it's very popular, and I think there'd be hell to pay if suddenly CBC Radio was defunded and lost a lot of its shows.
Yeah.
You just told, you told a great story there. What was your favorite story
that I've covered?
Yeah.
Boy, I've done a lot. I covered the Olympics in Beijing in 2008. I worked for Hockey Night in Canada. My favorite story was not at CBC, actually. It was in 1989. I was around when dinosaurs were around. 1989, I was working for CTV in Montreal. And I got to interview one of my heroes, Paul McCartney of the Beatles. And that's probably the biggest highlight of my career. But covering the Olympics was huge. And I never would have got that opportunity anywhere else. I was in China for 4 weeks, and I learned a lot too. That's the great thing. You learn a lot, and it makes you a better journalist when you get these opportunities. I've been lucky that CBC has sent me to work in as far away as Mexico, China, Washington, London, Ottawa, of course. I worked all across Canada, Ottawa, Parliament Hill. I've been really lucky that I got these opportunities. I'm very grateful for them.
What do you think those experiences, I mean, all three of us have been lucky to work in storytelling and to get to meet a bunch of different people and exposed to so many different ideas. What do you think that kind of a career does for you as a person?
It makes you a more well-rounded person and more in-depth. And the thing I learned at CBC that I didn't learn at CTV and Global, and this may have been my fault, is storytelling. And I often see it now on certain stories. You'll see a reporter just roll out a bunch of statistics without any storytelling behind it. And they'll say such and such sales are up 42%, but the gross domestic product is down 4%. And numbers in terms of television or radio, to me, they tend to bore the listener or viewer. If you can humanize a story, and that's what I learned to do at CBC, it will make you a better journalist. And one of the things I learned at CBC is to go out and find a human being that the story impacts. And whenever I see a story where there's no human element in it, I realize either the story was assigned to somebody very late, or the reporter couldn't be bothered to try and find someone to humanize the story. For example, if the unemployment numbers come out, it shows no work to just read out the numbers of unemployed people. You go out, find a person who's just lost his job or fears he's going to lose his job, and you build your story around that person and humanize the story. And that's one of the things I did learn to do at CBC. CBC offered me training, which I never got in Global or CTV, and they taught me how to interview somebody. And one of the things I learned was a technique from a guy named David Sawatsky, who's an author. As Scott, you may know that name.
Mm-hmm. John Sawatsky?
I'm sorry, John Sawatsky. Thank you so much.
He trained me too. It was my best day in recruiting.
Yes, great. Then you know. And he taught me the Sawatsky method of interviewing, and it works. And I won't bore your listeners and viewers by telling it now, but I do find it works, and I use it to this day. And I watch other reporters who don't use that, who use closed-end questions, or who ask multiple-pronged questions. So the person gets hit, that's being interviewed, gets hit with 5 or 6 questions at once. I hear it all the time, particularly in sports media.
Yeah, I train people in interviewing, and I use my own stuff, but a lot of Sawatsky stuff as well.
Yeah, it's very good. I learned a lot.
Do you think that type of training isn't existing today, or do you think it's do you see it more now because you're aware of it? Or I'm just wondering if you think there's any, like, one of our questions is, what do you think of the state of the CBC now? I'm just wondering what you think of the state of journalism in that regard now.
I did get the training at the CBC. We did get a little bit at Global. There was some training there. I haven't had the training in years because it was given to new reporters when they came on board, and I'd been there for 30 years, so I didn't really need it. I mean, you can always learn more, of course. The state of journalism, it's emaciating here in Canada, as we all know. I worry, excuse me, guys, I worry about the future of journalism. And look at, for example, in Toronto, News Talk 1010, and in Montreal, CJAD Radio. They don't have reporters anymore. They simply strip the audio from TV reports. They have their TV people reading newscasts. They don't have their own reporters anymore. And I can't honestly, in good conscience, tell anybody to go into this business because I don't know where it's going to go.
If we have people watching, if anybody has a question, you can type it into the comment section of where you're watching. We'll try to get one into Simon in the time that we have left for this. We asked you about your favorite story. What was your favorite newsroom to work in? I think we kind of know the answer, but still, I'd like to hear from you.
Boy, I've been lucky. I've worked in 3 really good newsrooms. The people at Global TV were great. I'm still friends with many of them to this day, well-known people there, and behind-the-scenes people. They were really great. Because I wanted to learn, I think the CBC local newsroom that I worked for from 1994 to 2000, was my favorite because of the opportunities I got, and because they wouldn't let me just file one version. They'd sit with you and say, let's improve this. I'll tell you a funny anecdote, guys. The first time I ever filed a story for the National, and the National goes on the air at 9 o'clock in Central Ontario. That's the version that the East Coast sees. Then there's a 10 o'clock version. Anyway, after my story ran at 9 o'clock, a producer called me in the edit suite. He said, okay, your story was okay. We're going to send somebody in to help you improve it. So I said, okay. I thought it'd be a producer. Who should walk in but Peter Mansbridge? Peter Mansbridge came in and he said, let's change this. Let's let's boost your voice here. Let's change this video here. We recut it for 10 o'clock. And this is the anchor who should have been, worried about his own performance. He came in to help me, and I've never forgotten that. And sure enough, the story looked much better at 10 o'clock than it did at 9. There was another one. I was very young, and one of my very first stories, I came with the script and I handed it to the woman who was at the National Assignment Desk. She was the senior producer. And she took my script, and I'm just going to use a little bit of, I'll just do this. She took my script and went like this and threw it at me. She threw it at me, and she said, go put some backbone into this. And I was shocked, but I took it to heart. After recovering. I rewrote the script for 10 o'clock, and I came back, and had trepidation, and she looked at me and she went, much better. So I learned a lot. I mean, they're tough, and if your story doesn't have what they expect, they will kill it. I once saw a colleague who was thrown on a story late, and I don't think she really had time to get up to speed on everything. And I heard the lineup editor say, "You're not in command of the story. Your story is dead." And I've never forgotten that, because they expect you to know the story inside out.
Yeah, I critique writers all the time, and one of the things you need to do is you need to be specific about what the issue is, right? It didn't sound like there's a lot of specific feedback there. Did you get the specific feedback in those instances?
I did. Yes, I did. Sorry, I just didn't go into it, Scott, because because of time constraints. But she's the lineup editor said you've got to show evidence of something or other, and this happened like 25 years ago. We need to see proof of this. Do you have statistics? And they'll do this regularly. I've seen reporters get questioned and grilled on stories, and often it's just rearranging things and saying, yes, you're right. I should have put this right at the beginning of the story.
Right.
Yeah, I had the same reaction, Scott. That's very vague feedback to walk away with. But also,
it's like, okay, yeah.
I mean, people forget
have
that.
Any terrible experiences?
Oh God, yes.
Like you failed miserably, or the story was just devastating, or something like that.
Yeah, sure. We all have. Any reporter who tells you everything's gone great is lying. When I was at Global TV once, our medical reporter was sick. And the assignment editor came up to me and said, you have to cover an operation today. And I went, oh my God, because it wasn't my area of expertise. And medical reporting is very specific. And our medical reporter was Avis Favreau, who was one of the best in the business. Yeah. And so I went to cover the story, and I was sitting in on an operation, and I asked a few questions after the doctors. I came back and I said to the assignment editor, I have no clue what happened today. I don't understand any of it. And she looked at me like this. And I said, I'm sorry, I just don't want to go to air with something where I have no idea what they were talking about. I didn't want to fake it. And I felt down, like I'd let down the newscast. But the next day, somebody came up to me and said, that was the wise thing to do. There's no sense putting something out there if you don't understand it. And he said, if you don't understand it, how is the viewer supposed to understand it?
Right.
I think that was the right call.
Yeah, I do too. Now, and
right
thank you. At the time, I thought, oh my God, is my career over? I don't know what to do here. But these things can happen to anybody where you simply are out of your depth.
Situation.
I'm sorry?
It put you in an unfair situation.
Yeah, and but I understood their point of view. They had nobody else to do it, and I'm a general news reporter, so I'm expected to be able to cover most things. That was one I couldn't do it at all. And I've seen other reporters go through the same thing.
Right.
If there's one thing I want people to take away from this discussion with you, it's that, when people criticize the media, and the media has power, so it's totally open for criticism. It's one of the reasons Scott and I are doing this. Everything happens so fast when you're on a daily newspaper or a daily news show. It all happens fast. There are layers of approval. It's easy to get something wrong, and there are all these things in place to make sure you don't. But there are times that it's a hard job. It's a hard job. You're not going to get it right all the time. There are all these things in places to make sure you get it right. But even then, it can be hard. I think you should be applauded for saying, I can't do the story. I don't have what I need here, the pieces and the understanding to do it. I just have one question left for you here. What do you want people to know about the CBC?
I want people to know this about the CBC, as well as Global and CTV, where I also work, that no one is deliberately trying to mislead them. I see it on social media all the time that the mainstream media are trying to mislead them. No journalist worth his salt is trying to mislead anybody. Yes, they make mistakes, but there's never anybody trying to mislead them. And then if a reporter was known for trying to mislead them, other reporters would talk about him or her, and they would lose respect. They're trying their best, and the people don't know the constraints that most reporters are up against. Here's the other thing a lot of people don't know. Unless you're a specialist, for example, a medical reporter or a business reporter, and if you're just a general reporter, you're given a story at 10 o'clock in the morning, you may know nothing about it. And you have to turn around that story and get it on the air, sometimes very early in the day. And that's why when mistakes can happen. And it's happened at all of the networks. So we're general reporters, and you could be lied to in an interview. And I've had that happen to me by people I was interviewing because they knew the subject better than I did. And you just have to try your best.
Yeah, I think that's an important message that I want people to know from this as well, is that, you talk about the importance of humanizing your stories, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's important to humanize the industry, that there are people like my brother and you and me who are out there just trying to do their best every day, who ultimately have the readers or the viewers or the public interest number one every single day. Mm-hmm. And it is very frustrating to see that criticism, that it's this homogenous group of people who are somehow puppets, being controlled.
There's been days where I've gone home, Scott, and I thought I did not do a good job on that story. I screwed this up. I did not give it 100%. I made a decision that backfired on me. And I don't know about you guys, but I would go to bed thinking, oh my God, I should have done this or should have done that. And the other thing is, often there's a meeting the following day after the newscast runs, and you go around the table and all the reporters are there and some of the producers and the news director, and they'll say, what did you think of the story? What could you have done better? And the other reporters are in the room, and some of them, not all, but some will say, you know what, we should have got such and such a person on this story. Why did we have such a weak interview? Or why did we just do man in street interviews instead of getting an expert? That actually happens in the after the newscast, and everything is reviewed. Everybody sees it, and everybody has to come up with a comment on it. And sometimes it's good, but sometimes it's like, okay, this was not our best work. Let's try better.
When I was on Discovery Canada, we would meet the next day, especially the early days, and talk about the show. And your work was criticized. I actually really liked it. It wasn't about you; it was about the work. Yeah. And that's how I got way better as a television producer, as a journalist.
Absolutely.
People criticize your work. I'll tell you one quick mistake. The mistakes that I have had go to air, it's not that they haunted me that night. They still haunt me sometimes. I remember there was a player for the Chicago Cubs, rookie, who had like a 19-game hitting streak. And we used to get this Sports News Service feed that came in at like 10:45. And you'd have to 10:15 to 10:45. I can't remember, it'd start. And you'd have to grab it and cut it and put it on the air. It was lightning fast. Yeah. And he had a 19-game hitting streak. And I went to air and I sat and watched it. And the announcer said that Doug Walton had a 19-game hitting streak. And Doug Walton was the guy who sat next to me on the row. And he was working on his script when that came up. He liked it. I didn't like it so much. We did actually have a question from you.
Have a question, yeah.
Eric Blaze said, I'd be interested to hear Simon talk about how the CBC and Radio Canada collaborate at times on stories. For example, stories with SRCs on Cotton, the Fifth Estate, Ottawa Bureau Chief, and News Network. How does that collaboration work?
Well, I can just tell you about SRC. I hate to say it, but it's true. In the old days, you'd go to some events and you'd see like six CBC vans, because CBC French would send a crew, CBC English, CBC Radio, CBC French Radio, the Journal, whatever. We've all heard that story. And I did see it happen once or twice. But nowadays, they don't do that. For example, when I cover the Prime Minister or one of his cabinet ministers, Radio-Canada doesn't even send anybody, and I'm the only one who goes, along with a cameraman, because I can ask questions in French. And so CBC does a lot more swapping of tape. Those of us who can speak the other language will do interviews for our colleagues and save them having to go do it. And they've done it for us too. Also, the other thing, people talk about defunding CBC, but maintaining money for Radio-Canada. Well, the problem with that is Radio-Canada's offices are within the same buildings as CBC. And in Toronto, for example, Radio-Canada relies on CBC footage, stuff that's shot by CBC English for a lot of its material. And we take some of their material too. So if suddenly CBC were massively defunded, they might have trouble fulfilling their mandate because they wouldn't have the facility. They may have to move to a smaller facility. They may have to change their mandate, not cover as much as they used to. You'll often see CBC English footage on Radio-Canada, and we use their footage too.
Anything else, Scott?
No, I think that's it. And thanks, Eric, for the question.
Thank you, Eric.
Yes, thanks, Eric. I just have one last thing as a bit of a collector. Before we go, can you just share a little bit of your mic flash collection with us?
These are, I don't know if your viewers can see them, but these are
for
the
people listening on the radio. There's the audio feed right behind Simon. He has a mic flash is something people put on the mic to identify what media entity you're with. And behind Simon is 3 rows of mic flashes.
Yeah, 43 years. So you can see I worked for Global News, CTV in Montreal when it was known as CFCF 12, News World, CBC News, CBC Radio, an old CBC Radio mic flash, CKO Radio, where I started my career, CJD Radio in Montreal, and down here, Hockey Night in Canada. I worked for them as well. So I'm very lucky. I got those given to me as gifts at my retirement party. One of the cameramen gave me the Hockey Night in Canada mic flash because he knew I'd worked there too, and I didn't have one.
I wondered if you had stolen all of those.
No, they gave them to me.
Well, Simon, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and experiences. We really appreciate it. Scott and I have never worked at the CBC. I've got no skin in the game for the CBC, but I am so grateful for the CBC that it's around, especially in troubled media landscape that we're in today. We need the CBC, and I admire the people who work there getting us the news every day.
Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate you having me on, and I understand the criticism of the CBC. There are things they get wrong. It could be better, but they're trying, and they're doing the best they can. Let's hope it just keeps getting better.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.